Before we continue with the video, if you like what I'm doing here on this channel, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel a lot. Anyway, let's get back to the video. Welcome back to my Create an RPG series. In this episode, we will be taking a deeper dive into a part of the combat. We will be talking about the combat collisions and stuff like that to determine who we are actually injuring. But I want to preface this a little bit with that this particular part will be a little bit messier when it comes to like the structure, because if you look at the components we've done so far, our abilities, they don't have a lot of functions. They are pretty clean, pretty small. They're very scalable. Everything is like very neat and tidy. However, this component now to do combat, I will be making into one a little bit maybe too big component, just so we can have a easier overview of it. If you want to at some later point like break it out into different parts that you feel are more aptly named and compartmentalized when it comes to their functionality, feel free to do so, of course. Anyway, let's start this off by creating a folder. We'll call this one combat. Inside of here, we'll create a blueprint component of actor component. We call it BPC combat. We will go into our third person character and add this immediately. So BPC combat. And opening up the BPC combat, we now have some stuff to do. The very first thing that we need to discuss a little bit is going to be collision detection, how we decide if something has been hit by an attack from us. Now, this can be done in a multitude of different ways, and they are ranging from good to bad, depending on the situation that you're using them in. We'll be demonstrating a bunch of them. One we can start off with is if you have your third person character, what you could do is you could add something like a cube. And actually not a cube. We want to have something like a collision, box collision. You could have something like this, and you could have it like positioned in front of it, something like this. Scale it up and say, when at a certain point in your animation, check if anything is overlapping in this box, and if it is, then do damage to that. This is quite possibly the very worst combat detection system you can possibly make. Not only is it like very rudimentary, it is also going to be very inaccurate, because most likely you will not have an attack that corresponds to this. This is something that would work maybe for a game like, I don't know, Legend of Zelda 1 or something, when you have like a top-down character and it has like a very small attack and you only have like one single attack. It only has the same pattern. But as soon as you have something like two different attacks or something like that, this is gonna fail and be very unresponsive and unprecise when it comes to detecting what kind of a damage dealing you're actually performing. So we will get rid of that one. There are others. If I go to our mesh, for example, actually, let's go to our animations. We have an animation we made one for the great sword attack here, right? So we have a mace here that we're hitting with. So in this case, for example, if we have an attack like this and we swing, then we will... You can see that we go from top right and then to bottom left, essentially. So stuff that is over here on the bottom right, we would not necessarily hit. Stuff that is on the top left are things that we probably don't want to hit. A game like Dark Souls, for example, would use something, for the most part, volumes when it comes to this kind of hit detection. It tends to be, especially when it comes to bosses, they have a certain part in their animation or multiple parts in their animation where they generate maybe a sphere or a box or something like that. So maybe they would generate a sphere around this position here of the maze here, and then one over here, and then just like continuously make some spheres to check, is there something in this sphere that I should be doing damage to, for example. So that is one way to go about this, and that works for a lot of different cases, to be honest, if you're just a little bit flexible. Another case, which is the one that we're going to be using, is that you have here, for example, when we start swinging, you can see we could theoretically reason that anything that is between the handle and the top of the mace is something that would be damaged. So we can each tick go in and say, is anything overlapping, is anything overlapping, is anything overlapping, is anything overlapping, and just continuously do that, and then determine that those are targets for us to actually deal damage to. You could do that differently also, and this is possibly a better way to do that, but we won't be doing it in this episode, but I'll talk a little bit about how you could do that if you would prefer to do it that way. And that is, you can do something similar where you keep track of a few different points along the shaft, for example, and then every frame you would check which position does it have now, and then you move a frame ahead. So on the next tick you check between the last point where it was and the new point where it is now, you can drag traces between them. So you'll have like lines that are actually following the swing. So they would be going like in this direction, diagonally, in this case. And the precision there is, of course, made up of by how many different points you would be choosing to make a line trace from, right? So the strength of such a system is that it will have fairly accurate hits. The downsides is you can possibly have the item, the weapon, hit you somewhere between two of those points that you put up. And if the line trace doesn't hit somewhere there, then you wouldn't register the hit at all, for example. Equally with the system that we're going to be making now, we will be making line traces that go along the length of the weapon, which means that if we have our animation skipping at some point, we might have a part of the animation where it jumps. So let's say that this here is where the animation is, and then for some reason the FPS drops, so we get that the next frame should be like a frame over here or something like that. Then everything in between those two different frames might be something that we should have hit, but we didn't do an actual line trace there, so we won't detect it. So there are lots of pros and cons to the different approaches that you want to possibly make use of when it comes to something like this. But hopefully now you have an understanding of some that are available and which one maybe that fits you the best and stuff. And also probably stay away from the one making a volume just in front of you, because that's honestly pretty trash. Because I mean, imagine if you have a horizontal slash that goes like so, then you would have a weapon that actually goes beyond that volume, and if you have like a slash that goes from top to bottom, they would not match up properly with the animations essentially. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's actually get to the actual logic of this. So we'll close this one down for now. And you might have noticed that I've talked about we are going to make use of tick, and this is something that I have repeatedly throughout all of my tutorials spoken about, that this is something that you should avoid as much as possible unless you can't avoid it. And in this case we will not be able to avoid it, but we will still be very deliberate about how we're actually making use of this. So how do we do that? Well, we'll make some custom events. We'll call the first one start damage detection. So this is when we decide that we want to start checking for doing damage. And equally then we will want to have another custom event, which we'll call stop damage detection. Like so. And the only thing that we're going to be doing in these are we're going to be calling set component tick enabled. And we're going to be doing this for both of these. So when we're at the start damage detection, we're gonna say enable tick, and when we've reached stop damage detection, we're gonna have it false. The point of this is, if we go back to the animation again, is that if we have an animation like this, we don't want to have, first of all, we don't want to have it running all the time. That's just a given. But even during an attack animation, we might not want to have it checking all the time either. Because, for example, this animation here, it only makes sense that from maybe this point to start checking for damage, and only when we reach maybe this point, stop checking for damage, right? So we need to have it flexible to allow us different points where we want it to actually make use of the tick. So that's one thing. So this is like the base for how we are going to keep our ticking like contained. To make this applicable and like make it work from the start, we need to actually set up this component, to not have it by default. We don't, because it will. We have removed all the tick events from previous things that we have done in the tutorial series before, but tick is still enabled by default. So if we go to class defaults up here, you can see start with tick enabled. And as long as we don't use it, it's not a huge thing. But in this case, we're actually going to be making use of tick, so we want to make sure that it's set to false to begin with. So it will not be making use of the tick unless we actually tell it to. Okay? So then the next thing becomes, how do we determine when this is supposed to happen? Well, we can make use of our gameplay tag system for this, for example. We can go to our project settings, and we can go to our gameplay tags, and we can say we want to have another type of attacking, for example. So let's make a tag, and we can go over here and we can say add subtag, and we can say, then you get the subtags up to this point, so you can just add something. And we can say something like weapon. Did I spell that properly? I did not. Rename weapon, like so. Okay. Okay, it needs apparently to restart when that happens, so I'll see you in a moment. Here we are again. Hopefully you didn't make a typo like I did. Anyway, now we can close down project settings and we can go to our gameplay tags. So our gameplay tags blueprint component. And in here we now want to add the functionality of like having a listener listen to this specific tag that we just added. So to do that, we are now going to be we're essentially going to be showing how you can now extend the gameplay tag system, with a whole new tag and all of its functionality. And it's not going to be a whole lot of steps when it comes to this. So what we're going to be needing to do is we're going to be having to add a tag listener, for example. We need to have that. And in here, we're going to have a event dispatcher. So we'll make sure to get one of those. We'll call this one attacking weapon change. Hopefully we made a signature. We did. Excellent. We can compile, save. We can drag it here. We can say call. No, not call. Sorry, my bad. We're gonna bind like so. And we're gonna be making a reroute here so we can hook it up like so. And now we need to make sure that we actually have a point here from our determine tag to funnel this functionality into. So we go into the macro. And in here we want to now essentially add this functionality. And this is where it becomes a little bit not as clean as before, but so this is what we're doing. We're checking against the state attacking weapon, right? Which means we need another output, which means we add it here and we say attacking weapon change. That's the name I want to have, but I want to have it as there. And we want to have it as an executable. We can move it up so it's a little bit, no, that's not what I wanted. Then change in the top, attacking over there. like so. And we'll just hook it up like this. So if it matches the state attacking weapon now, we'll say that it's attacking weapon change. Otherwise it goes to other. The false, I don't know where we got it from, so let's remove that one. Compile and save. So going back now to our previous, let's do this. Let's also do this. So now we can hook up the execution pin here for the binding of the event. So now we can say that if someone sends in this tag, we're gonna be sending this information. So notify tag change equally. Here you can see we have the attack weapon change now. So we're going to be calling it over here in this case. And once we've done that, we're done. And when it comes to the gameplay tag context, we have it created over here, so we can find a way to hook it up like so it's a bit prettier. So now we have handled the calling of the event dispatcher also. And that's pretty much everything that we need to do. And now we have essentially expanded the gameplay tag with one more tag. So we can now go to our BPC combat and we can say, from here, let's get the owner of the component. And from the owner, we can say that we want to get component by class. And we can say we want to have the gameplay tag component. That's the one that has all of our properties. And if this is valid, we can say that we want to add a listener here. So when this component is created now, we're adding the listener to the tag for attacking with a weapon. Okay? This we need to hook up with an event. So we'll make some space over here. We'll drag off. We'll create an event. We'll do it like so. We'll call this attack weapon change. And remember, this happens every time we are adding or removing a tag, so we need to make sure that we're actually that we have added the tag. So what we'll do here is we'll break this, because in here we have our active tags available. And from that we will check if it has the tag of attacking weapon currently in it, which means that at this point it still has it on. And we'll make sure to have it as an exact match here in case we want to specifically look for this one. We'll have a branch here that will check against the result from this. And from here we can now call on our functions that we've created, or rather not functions, but events in this case. But so if we have the tag, we start damage detection, and if we don't have the tag, we stop damage detection. And to check this, we can print and say do damage. Then we'll copy that and we'll say stop damage. Okay, excellent. So now we have some basic debugging testing here. So when we start, we add the tag listener. If we get the tag on us, then we will start checking for if we're doing damage. So an easy way to check this is if we go to our, let's close down that and that, and let's go to our, we want to go to our ability for our slash that we created. So here we can add, for example, in our tag functionality, we can say that we're going to be, instead of adding the user tag state attacking, we're going to be changing that to attacking with a weapon. So if we now press, what key did I even put that on? I don't even remember. There we go. And we're going to be making an attack. E key, we're using an ability. Okay, so let's press the E key and see what happens. You can see do damage and stop damage as we are adding and removing those tags. Okay, so that seems to be working. So that's all good. However, we are adding this tag at, this tag here the state weapon tag in the beginning of the attack and then removing it in the end. And that might not be what we're after because we want to have only part of the animation checking, but we can get to that later. For now, we can then add our functionality to what we're supposed to be doing on our tick, essentially. So when we're doing our tick, we want to do a few things. We want to first check, make a line trace, essentially. So to do that, we want to have our weapon. And we will be cleaning this up a little bit, I think, later. But for now, we can do... I really don't want to make a cast. Let's do it like this. I add a equipped weapon in the combat here. And so this will represent the equipped weapon that we actually have. So we'll make it of the BP weapon base. No, we didn't call it base, we call it weapon. So that is the base class. So we'll drag that off here and we'll say get weapon, and we'll right click to make sure that it's a validated get so that it is valid when we're trying to make use of it. And from here we can actually create a user interface, I think. So we'll create one in combat. We'll say, actually it's belonging to weapon, so let's create it here. So we go to blueprints, blueprint interface. We'll call this BPI underscore get damage locations, like so. And let's say we want to return, in this case we want to make a trace between 2 points, so we need to get 2 points back, right? So what we can do is we can create a struct to fill this information with. So we go to blueprints and structure, call this s underscore damage locations. We'll make sure that it has 2 variables, and we can call this whatever, but let's say it's A and B or something like that. Or you can call it top and bottom or whatever you want. But we need to have them as vectors because they're going to be positions in the world. Like so. Closing that down. We can now go to our BPI get damage locations and say we want to return s underscore damage location structure. However, you might have like multiples depending on the weapon. A sword makes sense, and a sword and a mace makes sense that you have a, let's see here, let me see the sword. It makes sense to have something like at the hilt and something at the top to make sure and check against that. But if you were to have something completely different as a weapon, like for example the axe, it might not make sense as much to check up here. So you might want to have maybe one check here, or you might want to have an additional check here and an additional check like so. Some multiple checks to make sure that it's a little bit more accurate. Because of that, we may want to have this BPI return not one structure, but a multitude of them, so yeah, that you can have like several sets of these line trace positions, essentially. So let's just say damage locations as the name. Close that down. We will go to our weapon base. We will say implement this interface that we created. So BPI get damage locations, like so. And this in turn will then return these positions to us. But how do we get these positions? Well, if we go to our sword, for example, which is the only weapon we've created so far, we can go to the skeletal mesh. Opening up the skeletal mesh, we can in here create some sockets. So we can say, call this socket A, and then create another one. And call that one B, for example. And now you can position these into positions where you want them to have represent. So we can have one here at the start of the hilt, and we can have another one that's at the tip of the sword, for example. So now they're going to be going between point A and point B here. So with that done, we can then go into our sword and say, in here. With our interface, we didn't call our interface something, it seems. Weapon, PPI weapon, let's call this get damage locations. Compile, save, go back to our sword. We see, okay, we don't see, let's compile. There we go, get damage locations. So we implement this. So this will be how it's represented in the sword. So you would implement this differently on each of the different children. So the axe, the hammer, the sword, etc, etc. So in this case, we can just make, we have a very simple case here. So we'll make an array, and we will make a damage location. And the locations we want to have here are going to be the sockets of this one. So we can get socket location, and two of them, and the first one we call A, and the second one we call B, because that's what we named our sockets to, and we just funnel them into these positions like so. So this should theoretically be what we need now to get these locations. So going back to our blueprint component again, this reference now, we can say get damage locations message to, and we will get a return here, which is an array, and we can say loop on it. And for each of these elements, we are going to be making a line trace. So we'll just go a multi-line trace. And the reason for this is we may hit multiple things, and we might want to damage multiple things then as we hit them. Breaking this, we now get our positions. We can say go between A and B, for example. And that's where we do our line trace. And then in addition to that, we may want to have a drawing it for persistent so that we see what's actually happening. So let's go and see if this works. This will not work because we don't have our sword equipped. So we need to equip the sword first. So let's add functionality for that quickly. Let's create an event. And let's say equip weapon. Let's say it takes a class of BP weapon as input, like so, to equip. And then here we essentially want to do what we did in a previous tutorial, which is, first of all, we want to spawn the actor from class, which is going to be like so. And then we split the transform, and then we can set this to be our equipped weapon, like so. And after that, we need to attach this to our mesh, essentially, like we did in our third-person character, which means that we need to get our owner and see, do you have a mesh? We have an interface called get mesh. So this will return the skeletal mesh, that skeletal mesh component of the actor if it has the interface implemented. And then using that, we can say attach actor to component. Is that not how it's spelled? I think it is. Attach actor. What if we drag this one? Attach actor. There we go. Attach actor to component. And the parent is going to be the skeletal mesh in this case. And the name of the socket where we are going to be attaching it will be the one that we're using over here. This is where we spawn the weapon. We use the right hand weapon socket, like so. So we'll go over here to component again, like so. And we'll make sure that these snap to target, snap to target, snap to target, and weld simulated bodies. This should be essentially what we did here before. We're snapping it over here, we're spawning it over here. So instead of doing this, we're going to be doing this instead. We're calling our combat BPC, we're saying equip weapon. And instead of that weapon, we're gonna say we're gonna equip the sword. So now we should theoretically get a sword when we start. And you see we get a sword. So pressing E now, you can see we are getting a lot of different line traces that are going to be aligned with the sword, in this case, at each frame that it had. And you can see that it's actually doing a lot of line traces where we might not want to actually have them. But again, we will come back to this and clean this up a little bit later. For now, this is fine. I know this has been a bit of a lengthier episode compared to the others, but this is a pretty big subject and I really want to make sure that you have like the proper understanding of why we're doing things, and also so you can make a determination yourself of what is the best way for you to go forward if you're making a damage system. But I think for now, this is good enough for this episode, and I hope to see you in the next one. Hopefully you found this video helpful. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you did not like it, leave a dislike. Leave any suggestions or comments you have down below. Subscribe and share this video if you want to see more like it in the future. That is all for now. Keep on learning. Take care.